thing that I think happened is that residents were talking to each other and they were giving each other information and asking questions and saying things, and so I think that actually gained momentum as the time went on, and people say, oh, there's only a couple more and I'll come again, I think there were two motives on the people that came to many sessions. Some came to truly hear, as we did, what the community was saying. Others came because they wanted to express a certain point of view to everyone, which is fine too, because it was open to the total community. And I'm anxious to see if the kinds of things we heard from people are going to coincide when we get the phone survey, or if it's going to be different. I'm anxious to have both of those pieces before we make some decisions on some things. I think it's important, since we said, let's ask the community. We need to get that from the community, and then make some decisions. I think that, really, the past couple of years, we've done a lot of things between the ICMA reports and things that staff has done, because we had to do reductions in things. We've got our 3-year budget now. We really have done a lot, and people are appreciative of the fact that we do all those things. But I think it's the anxiety of the times. Mm-hmm. I think it's the anxiety that's coming out in people because of the revenue situation, and because we've never been in this situation before. They're kind of like, what happened? So I think that's coming out in people. That's what I see.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
One of the, in addition to the things, as you said, we distributed information, but we also asked just a couple things, just really a couple things. What do you want in terms of services, and how do you want to pay for it? So that was structured specifically for that, and really did garner a lot of conversation and input. The phone survey is really a report card. Right. How are we doing, and where do you want to go from here? So that's a different aspect in terms of the strategy. The desire for questions came out. I know that there will come a time when you will speak to folks as well. So this is just one of a number of ways for us to interact with the public, and all of it is coming at the same time, which I think is important. I have a couple things, and one is response to Councilmember Slater, and I will say that I guess I view this council differently, because, and something Councilmember Beltramini always says, for the most part, we agree on most things. At the last meeting, couldn't share as well as you, but I mean, we really did go the whole meeting until Councilmember Beltramini said, you have to say it passed, because everything had passed. We had very good discussions. I think that we are respectful, that we truly care about each other. That's how I feel. What I do know is that no matter who sits in these seats, the numbers are the numbers. And as Councilmember Beltramini said tonight, the numbers are real. This is what the reality is. So chairs will shuffle. And there may be a lean to the left, lean to the right, stand up, sit down. But we are diverse. We are very reflective of the community in the diversity that sits here. Not in terms of age so much, except for the two of you, or background, but in terms of opinion. We are reflective of the community. And I appreciate the diversity. I truly do. I think it enriches our policy, and I think it enriches our decision making. So I beg to differ on that. And the second thing that I wanted to have Councilmember Howell have an opportunity to do was what you brought up at the end of the last meeting. Now, I had seen on the Troy Citizens United website for a long time, they kept indicating that there was going to be a stealth millage proposed before council, and they kept prophesying that, and I was always stunned to hear what stealth millage, because I just can't see it as possible. But at the last meeting during council comments, you shared that you would like to see a full discussion of the up to 1 mil option. And I would think that this would be a time if you wanted to talk about that. because it came up in terms of the community conversations where people had heard of this up to 1 mil for an independent library option. But there was general confusion about it. So I didn't know if you wanted to address your thoughts on that. You said for the merits of discussion.
Mayor, I brought it up because I thought that, in light of the fact that it was brought to us by the city manager, and also the fact that the library is still scheduled to close at the end of April from the standpoint of checking out privileges, I thought that we needed to have a full discussion as far as the opportunities would be to keep it open. And so, while I don't believe it's necessary to have a tax increase to support the library operations, or at least in that manner, I thought that we as a city council owed it to the city manager and to the public to at least discuss it. And if that's not what council wants to do, then we will do it. But if you want to do it now, then it's not something that I'm only one member of the city council, and so if we want to kick around the merits and the drawbacks of it, certainly we can, but it really shouldn't be a one-man show.
I was interested in your thoughts since you brought it up. You were going to talk about the merits or not. And I know you had written in your letter some of the demerits of it, shall we say.
Again, my point is that if this city council, if I asked each and every one of you, should a library be part of this city, and if you can prove to me there's even one of you that the answer is going to be no, then then perhaps my discussion is moot. But if we all answer yes, then we really have an objective, which is to fund it, and so then we need to go from there. In that scenario, considering that there are multiple options that we have available at our disposal, then there's no reason why that library should close at all, because we can raise the taxes unilaterally. We can offer to the public a tax increase in November and fund it out of fund balance through the end of the year, or we could simply budget in out of pre-existing revenues. So by moving things around, if you will. So I don't see there's, at least as far as I look at the horizon, there's no reason for the facility to close. And so I think if we're talking about common goals, if we can, and this is what I mentioned for the last meeting, if we have a starting point, which is the library is a service that we believe should be offered and should not be removed, if you will, from that plate of offerings, then we need to use that as a starting point and build from that.
I found at the conversations that I had after it was brought up that I was able to explain at the tables the difference between the library law option that's available to council, how it was different than what the Friends of the Troy Public Library had on the November ballot, and to explain the difference in about long-term sustained funding. As many people were confused by that. They thought that we could do what was on the ballot, and so I'd like to ask Mrs. Bloom if she would say something about that. I asked her for an explanation so I could explain it to people at the committee conversations.
The petition that was on the ballot was a dedicated funding, which was a longer term. It was a 10-year committed funding for the library. Another option that is under the 1877 Library Act is for council to pass up to 1 mil for library services, but that is an annual basis. It has to be done on an annual basis, and there is an independent board. The difference between the two, under the proposal that was on the ballot last November, that would have been an elected board ultimately that would have controlled the library. If council were to pass a certain amount for millage to support library services, then it would be an appointed board. But in both of those cases, they are independent boards. The independent board would hire library director, would be responsible for the maintenance of the books, the collections, the library, all of that. And I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Okay, Councilwoman McGinnis, I think, was next.
Well, two things. One, also the difference would be with the proposal one that was on the ballot in November. That had, well, depending on which one you're reading, that one had a defined time period that you would have a millage established for versus the council approved up to 1 mil would be revisited every year. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
It would be,
So that's a big difference.
council would need to make that decision each year when they're doing their budget discussions, and when they pass the millage, then if council wanted to have a dedicated amount for libraries, then that would have to be done at that time on an annual basis.
So what the cry that you heard from a lot of people in terms of take the library away from council, take it away as a political pawn, really in effect, you would be establishing something where a council of 7 people that would be changing all the time would have to get together every year and have a discussion about the library, and the fate of all the people that had stuck around to try to make our library work would be up in the air every year. So I think that's a big difference. And I want to just make a comment that it kind of just finally came to me in a way that I could articulate it. I could just be sticking my foot in my mouth by saying that, because it won't be articulate. But I think, Councilman Howell, the issue that I have that goes to the discussion that we're kind of hedging around the table right now is that if we're going to be bringing forward a solution so we can kind of see where we might be able to come together on something, I have an issue when that starts with, well, let me throw something out there. I would never do it, but let me hear from people who may or may not do it. I think for me, it's just hard to use that as a jumping off point, because I know from the get-go that we're having a discussion about something that you would never support. And I guess I can just use the issue with the 1 mil that would be approved by council. You know, when we're going to start trying to have a conversation where maybe we may not all see eye to eye on everything, but you come to the table with, you know, this is something that I would support. I think that this is a piece that, you know, has to be a part of this for me to feel comfortable with it. It's a much different conversation than coming to the table and saying, well, people are talking about this, I would never do it, but let's spend some time to see if other people, do you know what I'm saying? I feel like it has to start with a solution that you're proposing, even if it's not a full solution, but if there's some component of it, like, for example, and then I don't want to speak for you, but in previous conversations, or even when we had the November election about Proposal 1, you had a real issue with creating another level of government, the Independent Library Board. At least that's what I took away from it. So if on its face that's what we know your position to be, and I think that there are pros and cons to that, and a discussion could be had about it, but it almost seems a little disingenuous to bring forward something that we know that you would never support. And I don't know if that's just, you know, I kind of feel that happens on a number of different levels about things we're talking about. I want to spend the time seeing where we can come to some sort of common ground, but I think it's difficult to do that when, at least I personally feel like something that you're bringing to the table is not something that you would ever support. You know, it almost makes people wonder what the motivation is for it, and I don't think that that's really where we're going to make strides. So I think if we're going to have a discussion about that, we need to come to the table and be prepared to say something that we would support. I mean, you know, there were conversations that you've had about a certain way that you thought you should, you know, the budget should be maneuvered around. I wish there had been more discussion about it in public forum, because I think that your points are valid. I think that you're extremely intelligent and you have a lot of experience. I just wish that we had had more of those discussions in the public forum so that people could kind of see, you know, how we got to a place that we ended up, and that's all hindsight. But I think in going forward, you know, it would be a better place for us to start if you came forward with something that you would be willing to do versus something you already know that you're not going to do. I mean, we spend a lot of time and energy kind of feeling like we're defending ourselves. And I don't mean to attack you, but I'm just saying on this particular issue, because it's what we're dealing with right now, you know, we spend all this time and effort feeling like we're defending ourselves and we know that it's not ever going to be something that we would get consensus on, at some point it gets a little old, I guess. That's just my personal opinion, and I don't know if anyone else feels that way, but I felt like I could finally have an example where I could explain myself a little bit better. So,
Councilwoman Beltran, I think you asked for the floor now.
Well, in talking about the 1 mil and
Up to 1 mil.
up to 1 mil, and independent board and all of that, it seems to me that there's a provision to make that happen, but there's not a provision to bring it back. So that should times get good and we want to make that a city department again, there's no provision in the law to do that. So once we start down that road, we then have an appointed board, which is one further step away from the people. And they do all the hiring, building within whatever that levy is, as opposed to the other independent board, and that's the best way to put it, the other independent board that is elected by the people. And yes, it's one more level of government, but at least the people get to decide who sits there. Those are the two choices beyond a city department. And for me personally, the problem with the council levy piece is we never can pull it back.
Right.
And that's problematic. If we're going to set up another body of government, so to speak, with the ability to handle millions of dollars, I'd like to see some of that board elected, if not all of it. So, and that doesn't happen. So that's problematic for me from a democratic standpoint and from a standpoint of if we recover revenues. It's a signature service that we can't ever pull back. So.
Councilman Howard?
Well, I just wanted to respond to the previous comments. First, I think as far as the independent library board is concerned, I think you could actually set the mill levy at 0 and therefore defunding it. That's one way you have available. Two, to respond to Councilwoman McGinnis's comments, you know, I could turn that around and say there's clearly a majority of the city council that wants a tax increase, since we're sticking words in people's mouths, and that seems to be what you wanted to do with me. Since there seems to be a majority on the city council that wants to increase taxes, then it seems disingenuous not to mention the tax increase that is available to you and that you may very well support. There's a majority of the city council that disagrees with my viewpoint that they should be funded with the current mill levy. I brought that forward, and I've mentioned that, and we have at least 3 votes to show where I voted that position. The onus should not be on me to advocate for increasing taxes. That's a very bizarre thing to demand of me. As a matter of fact, what needs to happen is there needs to be, this ties in with what I said before about what happened in the sessions that I attended. And I think we need to get all of the information out there. And so, as an example, 10% salary and benefits, that seems simple enough. But wait a minute. Then we start probing the question and we find out that the 10% is 10% of certain things, but not other things. We're going to pick and choose. You understand why I'm frustrated? Because what we agreed on is not what came to be. And now we're saying that we agreed on what came to be, when in fact, right in front of us, it tells us it's not. Likewise, we pay for actuarial reports, but we don't want to incorporate them into anything other than 1 year's budgets. You see where I'm frustrated? Also, in February, you want to talk about building trust, okay? Councilwoman McGinnis, to accuse me of advocating taking money from a pension plan and saying that that is immoral, when in fact all I'm saying is use the actuary report. It's going to happen whether or not we like it. Have the discussion at the council table. That doesn't build trust. It builds animosity.
Councilman McGinnis? Councilwoman?
I understand the frustration. I do. I do understand the frustration. We are all under fire, a certain amount of fire. Going back to the general topic, which people did bring up, an independent library. And the misnomer between what we have, which is a city service library. I think when the 1877 Act came, that made sense. What's wonderful about the Troy community is that the library was here first before a city. That people in this community valued a library that much to self-start. And we would not need an 1877 Act to trigger a library taking place like some communities had to begin an independent library, because we in fact had that as part of our beginnings, and that's really quite wonderful. So to use the 1877 Act to establish an independent library, I would not be in favor of as a public policy for a lot of the reasons that you all mentioned. It is up to 1 mil, which could be completely defunded at the whim of council. It is not an elected board, and it's an appointed board by whomever sits on council at that time. It is an all or nothing. Once that decision is made, it is forever. One can't go back. In terms of getting quality people on a 1-year, guess what we're going to do, contract, that's a problem. So although I know people heard out there great, and it was characterized more like 1 mil library rather than an up to 1 mil independent library separate from what we have. The final thing brings up what Councilmember Howlick did bring up in the letter, which was you would pay twice, not double, which you clarified at the table, but regardless, a transaction would have to take place. Would it be $1? Would it be whatever? But the transaction from that city library to an independent library is something as well. So all of those problems in that Independent Library Act, I don't think is good policy. What I do think is good policy, and what I did hear from residents, is the longing for long-term dedicated funding. And I believe one of the questions that's being probed right now, and one that I heard people talking about at the table, and you might see in here, is that longing for, let's get it so that we don't have to go back and do this every single time. Let's get a dedicated millage, which would preserve that as a city service. You called it core, but I would say integral. That it's something that this community has valued for years, and it is something that has given us a black eye. When we see 87%, was that what came out recently, in that library of 700 some millages that passed for libraries, 87% passed, and then they list us in that article saying, well, we have a Saks and we have a Neiman, but there goes the library. So there has been a disconnect with a lot of things. And I know that we're all under pressure, and I know that we all can do better, and we will do better. And part of that's through not only our ability to have conversations with each other, and I would like them to be true conversations in the next couple weeks, but also those opportunities when we have them with our residents.
I think the article you referred to is in the Library Journal, and it was really stunning to read because of so many communities, and it was nationwide, that voted for millages for their library. Yeah, I think that it's going to be interesting to read these as well as to, hear what we heard at the various sessions that we were at, and then get the additional information that's there. I don't think we're not going to solve anything tonight. The intent of the study session was to share, what we learned. So I think that's been good. Okay. Now, when we meet again for a council meeting, it's going to be on the 18th, and that's when we'll have the report from
It's our policy, Target Insight.
Target Insight on the telephone survey, and the questions will be out there so that everybody will know what the questions were that were asked. When he gives the report, we'll know the questions, what the answers were,
And
all
the report
that.
card.
And the report card.
In fact, I've asked Ed to make the presentation himself.
Yeah, okay. And we'll have all that. And then at some point after, I don't know if we're going to do it that night or if it has to be another session, because the next session of council is budget study, is putting these two pieces together to make some decisions.
And to give direction.
And give
We need to
direction.
give some thought to
Yeah.
that. as we get that. Very good.
Okay?
Very
All
Are we
right.
citizens going to get a copy of the question?
It's going to be out for public information when we get it on the 18th. Everybody's getting it. Okay?
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Oh, we ran 15 minutes over.
We stand adjourned.
We stand adjourned. Yes, we're in adjournment.